From Energy.Media, this is Energy Superheroes with Peter Perry. I'm excited to do our fifth episode of the Energy Superheroes podcast. Today we have Robert Harms, and I'll let him get into his background and the companies that he's with. But he's just given a power talk on artificial intelligence. And Robert goes into the weeds of AI in a way that I think very few people can do. He knows AI well. He also talks about a company called EPC Lens, and we have a lot of EPCs in our audience here. So I'm sure that we'll get into some of that. But before we do, I'd like to just get into Robert's background a little bit. So welcome to the podcast, Robert. It's great to have you.
Oh, thank you very much, Peter. It's I since I've learned about you and what you're doing, I've been very enthusiastic and happy to support it, and all the people in your audience that you're working with. I think it's a terrific platform. So thank you.
Awesome,
for having
great
me.
to have you. So let's start with just a little of your background. Could you tell us how you got involved in the energy industry and what led you to the place where you are today?
Yeah, it's well, that's a bit of a tortured journey. Starting with my original intention was to be a combination. I love physics and music. So when I started, actually, when I post school, I actually went into, or even before I finished, I became a professional musician. Was traveling around as a playing some complex music like Rush and some other things that very few people like, and uh, and and but what fascinated me was these large capital projects, the like these great statues of production and manufacturing, and the facilities and what they do, and how they really are the engines of the world. Taking natural resources and turning them into something just a little prettier, but something that drives civilization. And that's what these facilities are, and that's the way I saw them. And they're in my perspective, they're beautiful. Like, I find them very, very pleasing, particularly a petrochemical facility or a nuclear plant. But so I transitioned slowly, educationally, over to construction and to project management, and with an eye on law, and that was in about 91, 92 when I started doing that. I was with Brown and Root at the time. They became KBR ultimately, and we were working on did mostly we were I was delighted and privileged to be part of the lump sum team in Canada. Now, most of their work was most of their projects were reimbursable, cost plus types, but we had a team on the union side that was doing lump sum projects. So I had a terrific initial mentor, was this fellow who he drove a project, and so he was the big bear, and he took me under his arm and called me Little Bear, and I was just trying to figure stuff out, but the technical part of it and became um, slowly kind of got shifted to the side, because it's the business part of it that became so fascinating to me, with respect to the law, the productivity, the actual delivery of the project, not so much the particular engineering of any particular project. But so since then, I've worked through a number of different organizations in construction management, and then into engineering, EPC, EPCM, different models, projects, up to then consulting. Since 2003, I started consulting, started my own company, and then I started getting the phone calls and requests to take on different things around the world for the companies like Shell, Statoil, which is now Equinor, Suncor, Canadian Natural Resources. I was the strategist for the original Horizon project, for the execution, breaking that down with all the international EPC companies. renewables, the wind farms in Germany and Canada. Interesting projects, very, very different than oil and gas. Power projects and mining the largest mining mills in the world in Saskatchewan, northern Saskatchewan. So I've done my time living in a little Atco little trailer with ice, 3 inches thick on the window, and that's no joke. And just hoping that the generator outside, the diesel generator, doesn't go down because you're a long ways from anything. But throughout that, so that's about 23, 24 years. And when the market crashed, primarily Canada and the US, but around the world as well, in the Middle East, doing some interesting projects there. But doing, as we go through these projects, we particularly as a contracted individual or contracted company, there are things that we repeat, that we keep repeating because we don't have the time to re-engineer some of these processes. And sometimes we just don't have enough time to think about it. We know it's a problem. We know that planning is a problem. We know that estimating, cost management is a problem that we know, not by their natures. By their natures, they're the solutions, they're the means and the methods. But it's the things that when we get forced into making decisions and doing things, and that cause enormous friction and things that go wrong, those are the things I started adding those up. And I said, hey, there's a couple of key things that we can do here. If we can find some solutions to that just are a little bit more than, we need more communication, better planning, and a software tool. Those worked in the 80s and the 90s and early 2000s, and that's not. But we're into a fascinating area now, and so taking that 25 years of experience and turning that into an opportunity to change things and to educate, it's fascinating and very exciting to me.
Very cool. So I want to go back to Big Bear. You tell me about this mentor. What's the best advice he ever gave you?
Oh, well, I've had 4 mentors that I think that really, really, I was very fortunate to have good mentors. Because, and particularly those mentors they were all older, much older, like not 5 or 10 years. These guys were all in their 60s and 70s, and they had come off of, careers of 30, 40 years of working, whether it's construction. One guy was a vice president of Bechtel, and these of construction for Bechtel. So their perspectives, the things that they had gone through, are just absolutely fascinating. As a matter of fact, I started writing papers about it because there's just no way to educate people. But there are a couple of things early on. It really wasn't. It wasn't so much a lesson that sat down where something he told me, but each mentor is common. There's a common denominator in that they're all astute students of the human condition. Every successful person I know is really a philosopher, is a psychologist, a philosopher, a politician, and a negotiator of people. Really, that's it. It drives. That's what drives. Creates enables success for people. And the first one, his name was Andre, and he was originally from Quebec, and he grew up in the trades and in the unions back. So that would have been 90 minus 50 years. So it was around 1945 or something like this. He was a kid in Quebec and getting into some of the brawls and some of the union hassles that they had at the time. And that's a very different time than what we experience or what I experience today. But it was the way he approached people was still very old school, and he was and after running so many projects in a lump sum environment, it was how he selected certain individuals to put around him, so that he didn't have to be a manager in that sense. he just didn't have to. All he had to do is really was just he was a maestro. Not that we were all that talented. We were ambitious and hard ass, but we weren't we weren't brilliant. Uh, we were, anyway, the but it was how he picked the people, and it was just to watch him do that and to hear him talk about these people when they're not there, and to be on that inside and to hear his observations about people. That was I think that was the most significant thing from my first experience, from my first mentor.
It's great. Yeah, it's so important to select the right people to have around you, because if you have the wrong people, you can put all the management controls in place you want, but it's not going to be effective. You've got to have the right people at the end of the day, and then those controls end up becoming more like guidelines, because if you have the right people, you can trust them to make the right decisions. So I think
Yeah.
that's awesome. So in your career working on these projects, I love the word you use, engines of the world, to describe these facilities, because we're obviously very focused on large industrial facilities, and engines of the world is an awesome moniker. Um, what would you say that in working on those facilities from your earlier career that you're the most proud of?
The facilities, like the natures of these facilities.
Yeah, you mentioned working on petrochemical and nuclear facilities
Yeah,
and these different plants. Um,
yeah,
what in that time, what would you say that you're the most proud of as far as your accomplishments working on those facilities?
yeah. It's aggregate. It's there's a concept of the wisdom paradox, where we're smart and very ambitious, and we're very quick to pick up on things when we're 20 years old, and by the time we get to 50, 55 years old, it, it it's it, we start out, we know very little, but we're very good at learning, and then by this point in a career 25 years later, the wisdom paradox is that the knowledge is there, the a lot of observations, right or wrong, good or bad, right? However we form that, getting to a point where there's an aggregate of information that that we get to slowly learn in combination again with with philosophy, with psychology, with business intelligence, these business international business sophistication and savvy. It's really it's not any individual project, because they all contribute in one way or another, and particularly. And this is one of the advantages of doing projects is that, or in larger projects, is you go through a 3 year spell and you learn a ton, and then you kind of if you get some time to network that in your brain, to really think it through deeply and understand those things, you rarely get an opportunity. The 3 years is the information gathering point, and then you get an opportunity to think about it. And now I'm in that position where I got all of this information, expertise from different kinds of projects. That's nuclear, mining, the super big holes that you dig, or in order to get just a little bit of uranium and gold. It's these are fantastic things that the public just don't understand. Being in the far north, where life, when you go out at 45 minus, you've got to have somebody with you, because you can die in 3 minutes. And so the all of these things that contribute to your education, to me, the most I'm most proud of and most pleased with, it's the that accumulated wealth of knowledge, and how now that becomes a very different value than I was when I was 25 years old, and how I could contribute to that project. And so that it's a very exciting stage to be at this
No,
point.
that's great. And I'm interested in this company EPC Lens that you talk about. Could you, from a project standpoint, and maybe incorporating AI, since that's what your Power Talk was about, could you talk about a project for EPC, working with EPC Lens, and how they might benefit from working with you guys, and in the context of for an EPC implementing AI in their organization today, whether it's for project controls or whatever you think is maybe the lowest hanging fruit use case for an
Yeah.
EPC today?
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. It can be a seemingly simple question, but it's a very large, complex answer. It grew out of a notion out of. I recall I was, earlier I was speaking about these little nuggets where I thought we could little places, gaps, omissions or things that we can do better where there's, too much friction and too transactional, too much energy is spent. And we start a project. So I'll go back to the problem that we faced and we still face, and the problem I wanted to fix, and I think I did, was with EPC Lens. Was we started at the front end of a project and we start scoping out a project. We're looking at a concept, and the one of the things that we need at the very beginning is we need to look at a business case for a project, and that is basically the basic cost. But it's more of a very high level, you know, a executive and board level strategy. What we're going to build, where, and when, and from that front, early decision to proceed with that, to investigate it, and getting it down into what's a sanctioned project. The information that goes into that, we've typically been working on some. It's vague, and and the engineers, the project control, the estimators, everybody knows it's vague. So we try to work with that. And so I thought that at that point, getting to the point where we've got a sanctioned project and a project execution plan, if we can sharpen up, how do we sharpen up that information? Well, the typical answer is, well, we do more engineering, do more engineering. That's part of it, but it is a contributing factor, but it's not the whole answer. A big part of the answer, a big part of the solution is understanding what the market does around the world and what, with respect to an OEM of a large compressor. Well, we tend to put in information which is very basic and very high level, and it's got we talk to a couple of different, or the project will talk to a couple of different OEMs for the big equipment, the big stuff that goes into the project, and they get some of that information. They start plugging that in, and as soon as it's plugged into that, and then with the cost, the schedule around those things, it's plus or minus 25% at the very best. And so 6 months later, when we actually put that into a project execution plan for somebody to sign off on, to say that this is now our budget, this is our plan, that information is obsolete. The market has changed, and you take a look what's happening now. There's no estimator on the planet who will give you a number for what it's going to cost for just the logistics for a project, because it's impossible to forecast right now. So that nebulous uncertainty, if we can sharpen that up, so it created a system which is a what I call reflective market intelligence, which takes a continuous feed from all of the marketplace, so that you don't have to call a couple of different vendors and then call back and have a couple of different meetings. It's a continuous feed of what we call dimensional data. And that's the business data in these organizations, plus their sentiment and what they're seeing or believe they're going to see, because they're talking to all these different clients, and they've got their upstream supply chain is enormous, and it's dynamic. It's volatile. So it's getting that perspective on a continuous basis, feeding into dashboards and reports on a continuous basis for the EPC firm or for the owner in category management, for construction companies and manufacturers, to have that understanding of what's happening on a daily basis in that market with respect to the metrics, the business, and the dimensions of that. So we created a system to make that work, where we took the cost from a project and the energy required by the resource energy, the human capital energy required of a project to do that, and the owner to that, the category management, turn that into a central platform where there's value for everybody, reduce the individual costs by millions of dollars for any large enterprise, where it's and be able to accelerate, compress, I should say, the schedule, the need for getting information. And so we're not dealing with 6-month-old information or 2-month-old information. We're dealing with present information, nothing more than 4 weeks old. So this is that's the core of it, sort of the engine of EPC Lens. With that network system of information, we're able to level up on the data and not just have some simple graphs and simple reports. Now we're looking at complex correlations. We have the opportunity to look at correlations, complex correlations across different disciplines and even across different industries. Right, a mining company is using the same people in Saskatchewan, Montana, and Colorado as a lot of the engineering and the designers and the constructors and the tradespeople using that same resource base, but they don't have any real visibility into what's happening. There are some high level reports available in the world. Some great companies do some create some insights, etc. But it's not hardly any use to a project. What the project needs is relevant data that's moving, and so that you can be informed about for decisions. And from that, the AI starts kicking off in a really exciting and grand way of what we can see, what we can correlate and interpret from this, and help to create strategies and contingencies. So that's a long elevator speech. Like I tell people that if they want the full elevator speech, they've got to go to the top floor of the building.
No, that's great. That's really helpful to understand that EPC Lens is really bringing a lot of value to the table with its data. So that's, I think, excellent. I'm curious to know, the EPCs well. What are some of the EPCs that you would say are really forward thinking and really well positioned in today's marketplace in terms of using advanced technology like AI to be successful?
Yeah, I think in this case, it's a great question. I've got to be very careful with that because a lot of companies, they're protecting they don't exactly discuss everything that they're doing. And so to come out and say that these are the companies that are doing it better than everybody else, that would be, that's a statement I simply wouldn't make. And if I did make it, I would be wrong. So there are a lot of the larger organizations, and not only just on the EPC side, but it's on the owner side that manage those projects. Companies like Tech Resources and in the mining space, and Shell, like Royal Dutch Shell and Shell Petrochemical, LNG Canada. There are a lot of companies that are doing a lot of things, but the technologies are more focused today. The advances are more focused on digital twinning and digitalization. And there's a bit of a misunderstanding there. Well, there's a large misunderstanding and misrepresentation, I think, from parts of the people who actually just deal with technology and calling it AI. Well, no, we're not doing AI. What we're doing is there's a lot of digitalization that still needs to happen. And that is just taking old processes, old forms and things that we're doing and turning it into transitioning to the binary world of the electron. So that is still a big part of industry, and it surprises me still how much of the industry has yet to go through that process. You look at most of the conferences and most of the papers and the periodicals out there. It really is about digital twinning and managing some of those systems, materials management, advanced work planning, getting that into software. They're going beyond digitization or digitalization. They're going into a world of really looking at something in a more complicated and pattern-driven way, and there are a lot of different consulting organizations that are specializing in different things with respect to technology for scanning with laser, getting the 4D scheduling is another one. There's project controls groups that are really focused on advancing the 3D design construction over time. It's really fascinating, and connecting that with the planning tools. It is a transition time, but I think that most of the large EPCs are all doing this. And if you want to look to take a reroute to answer the question for ourselves, it's you look at the ones who are doing lump sum EPC, and those are the ones that are focused on higher end technology or just cheap grunt engineering. I don't know, but the world is moving less away from fixed price contracting, EPC contracting, particularly competitive contracting, and moving toward convertibles and different things, because things are changing so fast. You want to enter a $20 billion project. Well, the world looks very, very different 7 years from now than it does as you go into this. So it's taking a decision on technology at the beginning. It's a long-term decision. Now you're painting yourself into a corner. Whatever tech you start with on that project, and by the time you finish it, it looks like you've got an old Apple II Plus sitting in the corner that's still doing your cost reports. So I'm extending that dialogue a little long, but I think the short answer is there are some very ambitious companies who have always been ambitious companies in forward thinking. There are the Fluors, the Bechtels, and those companies in the world, and increasingly so in the Middle East.
No, that's a great answer, Robert. So let's talk a little in general about, obviously a lot of this technology around digitization is driven around the mindset of also decarbonizing, of also advancing the the energy infrastructure to the point where it has a positive impact on the planet. So if I ask you just in general, what excites you most about the future of energy and the future of giving us advanced energy infrastructure, and what worries you the most about, let's say, climate change and other issues that the planet faces?
Well, let's maybe work backward with that a little series of questions. What worries me the most is, like, right now we are in the Model T era, right? We're in this era where everybody's putting up um, a gross or a service station, or a tire store or something like that, and we're going through this process where there are so many opportunities, ambitions, and enthusiasms and ideas that are spreading out so fast horizontally. And it is, and ultimately through the business cycle, the evolution of this, what it's going to come down to is, a number of key service companies that some of them are competitive and are our peers, and some of them do other things. And the business is going to reorganize. The overall industry, I should say, is reorganizing, is about to reorganize in a very, very different way than I think it ever has in the past. And and I worry about the increasing speed and the lack. We're entering that where there's a lack of definition and certainty about what can happen and what should happen. There are so many guns going off at ducks, right? It's very difficult to navigate, and it's very, very difficult for an organization to have any kind of a confidence that the decisions that they're making in where to go with AI, advanced technology, that it's so easy to be wrong. It's so easy to not pick the right solutions, or even just go down that, find the right track, which is what this is why I want to launch a nonprofit that's called Capex Science, and it is that's going to in the intent of that, the purpose of that is to work very, very closely in collaboration with major universities, and we started this already, on theoretical computer science and applied technologies, and to looking at the new algorithms, the new processes, and that are being discovered and worked out, and how quickly that can transition to practical applications. In the past, it's been academia, and the white papers have been 20, 30 years ahead of what we can think about doing. Right now, we're in a phase here where we've got 5 years roughly before quantum computing becomes a very real practical solution and tool in our kit for doing things. Well, if we're wrong, what are we going to do, if we're setting ourselves up, for a 10-year IT program, and we haven't considered what that's how it's going to be affected by quantum computing, and we still don't even know what quantum computing, how it's going to work. And so we're in conversations with a couple of those companies in the U.S. that are working on those technologies and those softwares. Companies like institutions like Waterloo, University of Waterloo, and they built quantum computing departments now. These are things that are happening so fast, and the information that's there, getting that and transitioning that into something that's real for execution, while may seem rather improbable or suspicious, even to try and sell that. But that's what's happening. That is going to happen. And it's going to continue to compress and accelerate. So while I think that's there's so much going on, there's so much noise going on, it's really the thing that bothers me the most is that it's so difficult to find the signal, the true signal in all of that. So that is both the bad thing, and that's one of the things I'm really excited about, is moving that forward. I think that we need to industry needs to prepare to look at projects a little bit differently, largely because the projects are going to be different. You look across the distribution, the standard distribution curve of these kinds of projects. Well, on the renewable side and aerospace, and there are a lot of technologies that are carbon sequestering, CO2. We're growing into some new areas, and I think that's understood that we need to create slightly different organizations to make that work. It's not the standard old EPC monolith that goes into this. This is an owner-driven system working with all these, similar to like a microsystem or packages of software. It's getting specialization where you go in, you're very, very quick, you're very efficient, and you're not doing more than you need to do, right? I guess that's efficiency, but we're transitioning to that, and I think we can do that real well. The next part is that, again, it's scary, but it's also the most fascinating and probably one of the most difficult things to get our heads around from the purely EPC perspective, capital development perspective, is the ESG. It's the environmental, the social, and the governance elements. And the financing that's supporting all of these projects is driving all of these decisions. Well, that is very, very quickly going to trickle into the project and how they're getting managed. And right now, traditionally, the projects get managed with the ESG as completely separate elements outside of the project. Now we're going to have to engineer and execute and strategize with communities, with the environment in a much larger scale and in greater intensity, and with a different kind of and governance is changing, and the world is changing, and when you take a look at how COVID. Don't want to date the broadcast, but how COVID how it really disrupted the entire global supply chain and really illustrated or demonstrated the effects of that to people who weren't really students of it, right? And you're taking a look at everything that's happening now. Our world is so quick to respond to anything, and it does it radically. And you see it in the markets, you see it in the equity markets, where it's no longer little bumps and sine curves in the changes. We go through radical swings. And projects are getting caught up in that. And right, the next thing that we're working on is the ESG and how to do that.
No, I think that's great, Robert. This has been awesome. We're almost at time here, but if not to put you on the spot, but if in one sentence you could say something that the audience should learn from you that I didn't ask, I would love to hear that before we end.
Well, I think that get together closer with the industry and the think tanks that are out there, because it's no longer an abstract area of thought that is not practical. The bridging academia and business executives closer to projects is critical moving forward.
Awesome, Robert. This has been great. Thank you so much for your time today to be here on Energy Superheroes, talk about artificial intelligence, EPCs. We even got into ESG, which is a favorite topic of everybody right now. So I appreciate your time today. We're excited to have you. And we look forward to having Robert as well on Power Talks, where he's going to go into more detail about artificial intelligence. You'll be seeing that in the coming weeks. So thanks, Robert, for being here. And be sure to check out Robert on LinkedIn as well as his EPC Lens. You'll be glad you did. Thanks for joining, everybody. For more Energy Superheroes with Peter Perry, visit Energy.Media.